Welcome to Marketing MASH, brought to you by themarketingscope.com.
All right, everyone. Thank you to the Marketing MASH live series with special host Daniel Newman and, of course, Brian Fanzo, the iSocial Fonz, world-renowned, well-loved, well-liked. And the topic is going to be marketing to CMOs, or as the great Dan Newman said in an article recently in Forbes, and he did one for the Marketing Scope that just went live today. And it's an interesting question. You bring up, are marketers overhyping marketing to CMOs? And so that'll be one of the topics today. And we're going to take questions through the live comments session as much as possible. Okay, guys? So, Dan, I want to kick it off with you. I mean, talk to me about why you wrote this article. And I know a little bit of the reasons because we talked about this 2 months ago, I think, or maybe 3 months ago. Kind of kick that off. And then I have a couple of direct questions for you.
Well, we were inspired, right? You and I talked, months ago about the CMO Summit, CMO series that the Marketing Scope is going to do.
Yeah, thanks.
And I said, there's so much hype around talking to CMOs. I said, we've got to jump on the hype wagon and get some events planned to talk to CMOs. But at the same time, I was really thinking to myself, CMOs really don't buy a lot. It was kind of like when I was, I was CEO of a company, I had about 120 employees, and people loved to take me golfing and take me to lunch. But then at the end of most of those meetings, they would ask me about buying products from them. And I would kind of say, well, you need to talk to my head of engineering, or you need to talk to my head of sales, or you need to talk to our marketing director. My point was, it was great, and I'm sure it looked good on their expense report to go back and say, hey, we took the CEO out to lunch. But the long and the short of it was, I wasn't making a lot of the buying decisions. CIOs historically, and now CMOs, have what are usually called objectives, priorities. You'd see lists come out from Gartner, CMO, CIO priorities for the year of 2015. And you would see topics like cloud or mobility or marketing. And the CMOs might have things like demand gen, lead gen, social, all their different things. But they're not the ones that actually are usually pulling the trigger on buying stuff. Usually the CMO is going to be working with a marketing director, a demand gen director, a product marketing team, potentially some technology leads. People throughout the organization that are actually going to be dictating the tech they want to use, what they're most comfortable with. Those are the people that are going to be in the early sales meetings. They're going to be heavily influential. The only thing a CMO might be able to do is open a door. And then, of course, they could override their whole team. But any good CMO or marketing leader would be crazy to do that in today's day and age.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Daniel. So let's ask the question, why? Why do we as marketers always, who are marketing to marketers, always say we need to get to the CMO? And I say we, I'm throwing myself in there because I've marketed to marketers for the last, 10 years plus from different brands. But I know that we'd always get execs that would come in and say, all right, we need to have an event. We need to have a program that targets the CMO. And it was painful, or, it was tricky to try to talk to that exec and explain, that CMO really doesn't buy our stuff. It's the director, or especially with the Fortune 1000 company, it could be even a senior manager or director. And they may come into the meeting, or the VP may come into the meeting, but a lot of times they don't even come in.
Is that because the CMO is so farly disconnected from the community and the user? I mean, because I think that the larger the company, the more distance between the CMO and the actual, I remember for me, like an influencer tool, right? The CMO said we need an influencer tool because everybody said we need one. The person that's actually using that tool probably was never even in the conversation, right? So it was like the director or manager did the A/B testing, the bake off, and then then said, okay, this is the one I pick. They're the ones that are actually you're selling, that are making that final purchase. But sadly, the person that should be probably in the conversation is the person that's the actual user of that tool that would be buying it, that the CMO deemed as important, that the manager decided which one was best. But the person that's going to live in that tool every day, Marketo is a good example for me. I remember Marketo got funneled down, and it was someone that worked for me directly, ended up getting the Marketo bucket dumped onto them. And they said, wait a second, I'm not a Marketo expert. We ended up having to send that person to Marketo training for 3 weeks. And if we would have put that person in the conversation, they would have realized that they were an Infusionsoft expert. and we would have got the Infusionsoft products, not the Marketo product. And it's interesting because you're right. I mean, this is a great discussion. We're targeting the CMO. The manager is probably the one making the decision, yet the end user might end up being the one that knows the most, that we might need to educate. But how do we even get that person in the right conversations from the outside in as well?
Well, you bring up a good point, because that was interesting. You said an influencer tool. I think, and my experience has been, I come from the brand side, right? B2B, different brands, usually on the tech side. When it was a new tool, like a social media brand advocacy platform or an influencer platform or something like that, that's somewhat new, then the CMO was a good person to talk to, or the SVP. But something that's tech, that's 5 years old, 10, 15, even with marketing automation lately, I mean, it wasn't always driven by someone that high up. That was our experience.
Well, Eric, because this, again, is the heart of why we need to talk about this. There's an influence that goes on, and that's what brands are trying to do. They're trying to influence CMOs to get their type of technology onto the list, right? So the Gartner hype cycle, you've got the Google Zero Moment of Truth. You've got a lot of reports out there that talk about how buyers' journeys work. What you're looking for is mind share from a CMO. If you're reselling a product that a CMO influences a buying decision on, you want to get into the process where a CMO says, we need a collaboration tool, and then goes to his team. But the actual steps for that brand to getting that CMO to recognize the need for a tool and then selecting your tool, there's probably, like, in a large enterprise, 10 people involved in a decision, maybe more, to a small enterprise where there's probably at least 2 or 3 other influencers. And what I'm saying is, we spend all that time working on the CMO. You're actually missing, if anything about what I've said is true, is that experience is the new marketing. The CMO is going to be the one that ends up with the least amount of hands-on experience with the tools. And a good CMO, a good leader, and this goes back to our conversation on our cloud talk that we do on digital transformation, is you've got to build trust of your team. And if you're not empowering your team to use the tools they want to use, you won't be a CMO for very long. You're not going to have a very happy team. So what I think, there's a part of the buy cycle that a CMO is important, and it's certainly important to have them wanting to invest in your technology type and ether. But if you spend all your effort after that not focusing on user experience and then the people that are going to be using your tools and products day to day, I think you're missing a huge opportunity, and you're creating a lot of risk for yourself and your business.
Yeah. And I'm curious to hear what other people have to say on this topic. So, feel free. We'll repeat some of your comments. But Brian, you were saying?
No, I worked in cybersecurity for 9 years, right? And the CISO never made a purchase. You never pitched a CISO. Because it was always and this is the weird dotted line aspect of it, is that in security, it was a network admin or your head of IT that usually even reported to the CIO. And so the CISO would say, these are the problems we need to solve. But the person that actually was always doing the baking off, the person that was always doing the decision makings, was never even in the CISO's suite, right? It wasn't even in their food chain. So I think that's an interesting, I didn't think of it until this discussion, which I love the discussion, because for me, is that part of the marketing now is overseeing so much, right? Social selling falls in there, and product management and customer service. I mean, we have like we've done the debate, the CDO, we can come up with all those other different titles that might be involved in there, but it's a really interesting because Daniel, I don't remember if it was your blog post, probably one of yours in your many published writings, about the CMO is buying more tech than the CIO, is in their food chain. But at the same time, is it the CMO that's buying it, or just all of the different things that report up to marketing now are actually requiring more technology? Not really the CMO. I think it's a definitely an interesting debate.
No question about it.
Yeah, and I think, Dan, you brought up a good point. It's a mix, right? And so you can't just hyper-focus your message, your efforts, your programs towards the CMO. It's interesting, though, I was at a company, 2 companies back, Intercall. I was at a startup, and a large tech company bought us, Intercall. And I remember there's 2 or 3 execs always saying, we got to talk to the SVP, we got to talk to the CMO. And it was hard, but what we did is I finally went to a couple of sales reps, got some input, but I just ran a report and looked at our last 50 customers that bought from us, and then went back and tried to figure out who was in those meetings too during that process. And it was rare when the CMO was even part of the process, maybe 20% at the most. And it was usually more mid-level companies, not the large enterprise. So anyway, Jack, jump on in when you can. But hey, while you're doing that, I want to ask Brian. Brian, I was doing some research, and some of this stuff is already, it's common knowledge, but I saw an article, and it's not too old. It says the first few things that a CMO should be doing when they start a company, or they start at a company or a startup. And I'm not going to name all of them, but the first two, well, the first one was interesting: network and connect with other execs, right? Because you're going to be trying to push a lot of big initiatives. So I get that. The second, third, and fourth are interesting. So second one, develop talent and get the most from your team. Next one is branding. What do you stand for? And I talked about this a few weeks ago in a video about creating your brand architecture, your brand promise, getting everyone across the organization to buy into that and make sure they tell that story correctly. And I know you are constantly touting that. And so that's why I'm getting to you here. But the last one, the fourth one, was interesting. And it fits right in with you. Build culture and live the brand, right? And so talk to me about some of the companies that you're seeing that are doing that, or give me your thoughts on that, because all three of those are things that you have experience in doing and working with different brands on. So I'll leave it to you.
It's interesting to think of like where the CMO comes into building the culture, because who's in charge of the brand story, right? The storytelling of the brand. We all say everybody in the company, and that's the line. But really, the CEO is going to try to dictate that, what the story is, what the value proposition is. The CMO is going to be involved. But it's interesting to hear the CMO's role in internal collaboration. Let's say like a social business tool. The CMO, yes, is probably the one that's more ingrained in getting the sales team to work with the marketing team. But a lot of, in my experience, it was funny how many times the HR team, because they're involved in the hiring and firing of culture fit, would actually have so much input inside of a company building a culture, but they were often siloed from the CMO, right? The CMO was not really connected as well to the head of HR or, the head of, who decided on hiring and firing. So to me, it's interesting to see where the future goes on really who's helping educate the employees on how to tell the brand story, because does it come from the CMO who's doing it publicly? But at the same time, the CMO is disconnected most of the time from the hiring decisions at all other departments levels. So how do you kind of connect both of those dots at a higher level? I think that's a very interesting discussion.
Yeah. I mean, here's a question. So, and by the way, I'm getting text by three different people. Shelly Kramer, the famous, wonderful, talented Shelly Kramer, normally is on this this weekly podcast, but she could not make it. So she will be back next week. Don't worry. Okay.
We might let her back. We might let her come back.
It's a boys club now. So she gets the most feels though, and she gets the most attention. So, but Dan, I got a question for you. So what are some of the best programs or best ways to connect with the CMO if you're trying to reach them? And I mean, I have a couple different, I have some experience in this, but I'm curious because I know you do this quite often as well. So.
Oh no, I just stalk them on social. I look up lists of CMOs, but in serious, a couple of things I'd probably recommend doing is, one is keep your content in the thought leadership and a brand leadership capacity. Like, they're not going to want a lot of hard brand sale type content. Like I said, what a CMO, much like a CIO or CEO is they're really looking at some strategic objectives for their company. They're probably responsible for something specific, like, building the company's lead demand demand gen programs. They're probably responsible for building a branding campaign. They're probably responsible for, a certain paid media, blitz or buy. And when I say they're not responsible for actually buying the media, they're responsible for setting up the structure of a paid media campaign. So if you're trying to get into one of those buckets with them and build a relationship there, you writing a bunch of content like, hi, I am Joe from, and I'll use the one that Jack was complaining about. I'm Joe from Marketo, and I want to sell you my marketing automation tool because of these 5 reasons. My marketing automation tool is awesome. Chances are that CMO does not want to read that piece of content. But if you have 5 ways that CMO can improve ad buys to increase performance on their advertisement buys or social ad buys to generate more leads, for instance, Eric, that CMO might be interested in reading that. That CMO might be interested in reading that for about all of 3 seconds and then sending that over to his demand gen manager and saying, hey, check this out. But that's a way you make a connection to both a CMO and like a VP or a director or a marketer. I write and publish content on a daily basis, and you will never once see in anything I publish me asking someone to buy something to really check out something specifically that I've done or something that they can generate revenue from me. But I get connects through like LinkedIn on a daily basis with CEOs, CMOs, CIOs, because you write content that's of interest to them. And then, of course, when they engage on it, when they share it, when they post it, when they publish it, when they comment on it, that's the door open. Talk to them.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's good points. And first of all, I want to welcome Jack, the Sassanova.
Yo, you guys are speaking about language here.
Well, Jack, real quick, I had a question, but I want to jump on what you said, Dan, is some of the success I've had over the last 10 years were the smaller, more intimate in-person or even online events, but a lot of the in-person ones where they got to connect and network with each other. So if there's going to be 10 CMOs or SVPs in a room, or let alone 40, and there's maybe a fireside chat, there's some good content like what you said, but it's really about the content and the conversations. If you could provide that forum, that's interesting to them. So
that's technically what our friend Ted Rubin does, right? I mean, that's what he's
brand ambassadors, right?
Yeah, he's the CMO connector, right? That's what he's focusing on from a CMO perspective. And it is pretty interesting. I did a CMO roundtable at IBM event, and I was the only non-CMO. I was the special guest. It was really interesting hearing them discuss pain points as a roundtable of 18 Fortune 50 CMOs. But it's because it was funny. They all had similar pain points, yet they were all doing different things to mitigate those pain points. So that was a really interesting concept. No, but I agree. What's up, Jack?
Yo.
So before we jump into Jack and give him a bunch of grief, Eric, I do want to go back to something you said earlier, Brian, too, is personalization. CMOs are important people. They believe they're important people, and they sure as heck don't want to feel like you're spamming them with general content. Like, they want to really feel like you're talking to them. That's where one-to-one is going to become more critical than ever. You want to build that relationship at that level. It's going to be high quality, and I hate the word thought leadership, but I really want to make it clear that you don't want to bang them up with pure marketing content. They're not going to read it. You've got to get over that hurdle first. That stuff, that top of funnel stuff, it works, but I don't think it's going to connect you at those high level decision makers. That's much more of the, rank and file.
Yeah. No, I mean, good point. I mean, so Jack, I'm going to ask you this question, but I'm going to set it up. First of all, I want to ask you, are we staying on topic here? Did we pick a focused topic? I have a microphone here, and I don't want to talk about it for 40 minutes because I know you really you dug deep into some people last night on Blab about that.
No, I've learned so much about microphones and a 2-hour session of Blab that I could probably change my thought leadership, and I'm going to start using the hashtag microphone thought leader.
So Jack, I know that you market and sell marketing automation platforms, and so I mean, where are you finding success with marketing leaders? I mean, it's probably not even CMOs really for you. It's more directors level.
Not a CMO. A CMO doesn't want to have a conversation with me.
For a lot of reasons.
Yeah, probably for a lot of reasons.
Well, when you're this good looking, nobody, a lot of people are scared, but when you're blabbing all day, right?
I'm intimidated.
No, a CMO, even at the highest level, a CMO's job is not buying, right? A CMO's job is to hire the right people that have the knowledge to make the right buying decisions, right? And then bring it to them. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong with their marketing these days, because you've got to go to the user. You've got to start at the user, because the user is the one that's got the pain, and the user is the one that's going to the CMO and complaining all the dang time and making the CMO's life miserable. So the CMO's pain is the user complaining all the time about how they don't have the right tools to do their job and why they can't get things done. So I've always said this, and I sell like this with marketing automation, is a CMO knows their gaps, right? You're not going to call up a CMO and go, oh man, you've got a gap here, here, and here. He's going to go, oh wow, Jack, you just gave me a new idea. He knows what they suck at, what they're good at, right? What they need to fix. And he knows what their budget looks like. He knows all this stuff already, or she, sorry. So you've got to build at the user level, and you've got to build the education there, because once they understand that you can make their life easier, and you've got to go after that relationship, right? And if you can have that relationship, they'll do it for you.
Well, I think the one thing we do need to make sure is very clear, though, is a CMO may not be the one that will buy from you, but they are the one that can stop anyone from buying from you. So there is the value, and that's really where building that trust and relationship at the top comes in, is brands need two ends. And, Jack, you're the sales guy, right? When you take your blab off and you stop with this microphone crap and you actually get back to work, because, what I'm saying though is you are in the trenches, right? The marketing department, the people that you need the help the most from though are the people that say, hey, how can Acton knock the doors down of company A, company B, company C, right? And basically make sure that when my user comes to our CMO and says, hey, I love Acton, I want to buy it, that CMO has a positive sentiment towards the brand because of the limited engagement, what they've read about it, heard about it, what the market is saying about it is positive in a way where, they basically have nothing bad to say. So that user that's influencing it from the bottom up means that also, they're getting good feedback from their peers. And that's why maybe influencing CMOs could really matter is that peer group.
Well, I would say that you're right on that. But here's the thing, like CMOs have, they have very little time to be reading content and to, watching blabs or, wherever that thought leadership is. They're not spending their time on their day watching this type of stuff, right? They're so busy. I mean, I know that I talk to CMOs on a daily basis. Like they're so busy that they can't even figure out how to do the basic functionality of their job, let alone go outside of that, right? So they usually have, in my opinion, they have certain channels that they go to on a daily basis, maybe 5 sites that they get all their thought leadership from, right? So if you can get into a CMO's day as one of his top 5 content channels, then he's going to read what you have to say. But with that being said, Forrester, Gartner, you have to be talked about those, and you have to have credibility in it from that perspective, because what I see is CMOs say, the user really likes like Acton. I've had a problem with this. Like, I really like Acton, but we're going to buy Marketo because my CMO, knows Marketo, right? And they don't want to make, the user doesn't want to make a bad buying decision because they could lose their job if something goes wrong because they pushed Acton when he never heard of it, right? So
remember they said nobody ever got fired for buying IBM, and then nobody ever got fired for buying Cisco. When you're the underdog, and that's kind of, I think, what I was trying to say, Jack, is that you don't want the CMO to have any negative will towards your brand. And I think that's where marketing to them makes sense, is that CMO read about you in Gartner. They read about when My Social Fans was tweeting fast and streaming faster, was talking about how your brand has a positive influence into the community, into the community, not the community in the sense of the huggy, lovey community, into the community of other brands that are trying to accomplish similar marketing goals.
Yep. And you've got to get in the brain of the CMO in your industry, right? Whatever your segment is, and figure out where the CMOs are spending their time to know who the players are, right? So, maybe that's Forrester, maybe not, right? I don't know. But, you can figure that out.
Isn't that weird though? So like, this is me not as a marketer, but like, to me, why is Forrester and Gartner still looked at? I mean, like, the more you pay, the higher you're up on the food chain. I mean, let's be honest. That sounds really. I mean, but that's the truth. Like, I ran that game, right? We couldn't even get in the Magic Quadrant of one of the software things because we weren't investing enough money with them as an analyst firm. So for me, this is where that whole influencer game comes into it, where it's is the CMO still? And Jack, I think you brought up a great point. If they don't have enough time, and shout out to Dustin Stout, because Dustin Stout said, hey, I'm a CMO that's in here listening, and Dustin is a CMO at a company that is listening. He's a little more digital social focused, so it makes a little bit more sense for him listening to these type of topics. But I think it's interesting. Is the reason that a CMO is defaulting to these, what I like to see, pay to play analyst firms, is because it's lazy? And is it because the CMO says, I can get this report if I pick from the top of the Magic Quadrant, if someone bitches or this becomes a bad tool, well, at least I picked based on Gartner, compared to going and saying, I picked the best tool because I went to my user, I went to my community, I went to the guy that I trust as a trusted advisor, and they're the ones that told me to do the tool. I'm just curious. I'm asking because I don't know better, because it blows my mind as an outside looking in that they use a resource to me that seems very gamified.
Yeah,
it's authority though. They have market authority in their particular areas. They are seen as researchers. They do deep research. They have extraordinary groups of people that are in the end analysis, producing the data. Right? When you and I quote stuff though, Brian, we constantly find ourselves quoting a Gartner, a Forrester, an IDC, because they produce the best data, and they're seen as unbiased. Right? It's kind of like media now. There's such a blurred line between like Gartner as the media and a Forbes article, because in both cases you can pay to be in it. So you can say, oh, look, we were featured here.
But to that point, I would rather quote Patrick Moorhead who's a friend of ours as an analyst who runs his own analyst firm, I would much rather quote the data coming out of his firm than I would out of Gartner, right? And that's just one of the ones that I think of as a outside looking in. Now you have a point. I think there's a difference between data and tools, right? And maybe Jack, I would love, from your standpoint, when you're presenting, do you bring up data from any of these analyst firms when you're either pitching or talking about your value?
Absolutely. Because everything is perception, right? Why do I spend $140 on Nikes when I could get the same comfortable shoe for $40, right? I mean, we are all driven in society by brands, right? Like we get sold on the brands that spend the most amount of money to be the most visible, right? Tell the best story. And whether you like it or not, we all do it on a daily basis, right? And CMOs run the same way. They have limited time, right? They have limited resources, and they don't have the time like we do as content connoisseurs to be running around and, actually digging into this stuff. They go to the 5 main sources, and it is what it is, right? I mean,
there's not a part of the media anymore you can't pay to be on, period.
I mean,
and Brian, you would agree with this, but someone started this talking about influencer marketing, right? Like we have influencer relations with certain brands. Now, I like to say publicly that the relationships I choose are because I do like the product. I decide that I want to genuinely get to know the product. But you can't tell me for a minute that when dollars exchange hands, that it doesn't have some influence on the way you think about a brand, period. So what I guess I'm saying is, as a CMO and as a brand that's trying to connect to these CMOs, you have to understand that these are real points of authority, to quote my friends at Lincoln Park. They are real points of authority in terms of they are going to go off that list. It's just like the reason they bought IBM or Cisco was because they didn't want to get fired. You buy from the hype cycle, you don't get in as much trouble as it when you go off grid.
Well, think about this too. But Dan, when you're at a dinner with your CMO buddies and you start blabbing off of another product, you got to be in the crowd too, right? You got to be able to have the conversations with the crowd.
That's what I was just going to get to, Jack. I mean, so Dan, you were talking about these analysts, and that is a source for them. The other one is the sales reps I always talk to. They said, man, it's embarrassing. I went in there and the CMO had never heard of us. So the other one's air cover. They want air cover. They want analyst relationships. They want good media coverage. So someone like Jack can walk in at least with a printed article or printed report, whether it be, a traditional media or an analyst firm. But the other one is the good CMOs. They have these relationships kind of like what Brian was talking about, where they go to brand innovators and they've met and they know other leaders. They'll call or send a quick note. Or if they're like Brian, they'll send a quick tweet. Hey, what do you know about this space? And we're looking at them. What do you think? Who you use? Right. So that's another one. I mean, it's influencers, but it's also your community. And that's what I do as well. I mean, I called you the other day, Dan, asking you for advice. I mean, I don't know why, but you were the first one I called.
You must have been drinking.
I started early that day.
So let's flip this back to what Jack said earlier. Jack said earlier, and I said it, I think around the same thing, was the idea that like the user is the pain point, right? The user is the one. Now, does the user any user and any tool in anything that a CMO is deciding, is the user ever have a relationship with the analyst? Ever. That doesn't even exist, right? An analyst, you ask a millennial what the hell an analyst is, and they are extremely, you know what they're going to say? They're going to say it's a Sports Center anchor, right? They're going to say that's the analyst. An idea of an analyst for this generation is just, it's a disconnected paid bobblehead.
Well, an analyst for millennial is an influencer.
What?
I mean, that's shift, right? An analyst now for a millennial is an influencer.
Correct, and that's what I was getting to. Like, to me, that's why. And Dan and I talked. We actually talked to an analyst about this, and we were saying like, what's the difference between $15,000 for a white paper and $2,000 for a white paper is an analyst firm versus our firm. Yet the people that are reading ours are the people that have the pain points and that are going to go advocate to the CMO. The people that are reading the analyst one that they paid more money for is usually the CMO, right? I'm just putting this out, not saying there's a right or wrong, but I think it's an interesting shift in dichotomy when we get more millennial thinking CMOs. Are they going to go to the Gartner and analyst to get their information, or are they going to go to the community and the influencer? And I'm just devil's advocate.
Hopefully
my take on this would be straight up, like, there's no such thing as a decision maker anymore. Okay, like if you read the Challenger sale, if you're in sales, you know the Challenger sale. Challenger sale says that there's like on average 6 to 8 people that you have to sell and convince before you are going to get a deal, right? From below the line to middle of the line to above the line. My job is so hard, not because I have to sell my product to one person. I got to figure out how to sell it to 8 people to get a yes, right? So from a marketing perspective, I think that's the shift in this MarTech revolution is that, okay, as a marketer now, you used to have to focus on how to get to just the CMO, right? Now you got to figure out how to message to the below the line in the company. And then you got to figure out what they want, what they like, what makes them tick. Then you got to go and you got to create more content for the middle of the line because they want something that the below the line doesn't want. And then you got to go above the line. So now as a content marketer, I've got to have 3 strategies to get into 6 people into a company if I effectively want to do it. And I call it like, socially surround, right? That's why I love social selling, because I can socially surround 2 in the below the line, 2 in the middle, 2 in the top, and I can use my influence from social visibility, advocate for them, and I can surround all 6 people and bring them in, little by little, and I can control the content that I put in front of each and every one of them, right? Because it's going to be
Jack, are you flexing? That's the reason that I basically wrote the next article on Forbes I wrote about salespeople needing to think like marketers, because salespeople cannot just single-handedly get one-to-one and get a decision anymore. It just doesn't work that way.
And on the other side, we asked Jack, I talked to him about 3 weeks ago, and he said us marketers need to start thinking more like salespeople, right?
Absolutely.
For sure.
Oh, well,
strong relationship. Maybe I'll report up to the same person, right? Someday.
There's convergence going on, and it actually goes back to what you said, though, Brian, when you asked about the analysts. So, kind of being on both sides, you and I are kind of we're kind of looked at as analysts by some brands. Some brands call us that, insights analysts, when we write for them instead of calling us influencers. Really, the line is blurred. And you talk about, Patrick Moorhead, who we work with, one of the leading independents, and he said that, he's worked really hard to get more social, because he understands the value of being digital, of having a footprint, of talking to communities, and not just talking directly to brands and attending analyst events, but also having that broader community, yearning. And we even kind of joke about how our 2 firms are kind of growing towards each other as we keep doing things more and more upstream for tech brands, and as he keeps doing stuff more and more social. The traditional analyst firm that does work for B2B tech and the company that does marketing leadership for B2B tech are going like this. They're moving like this. And then there's that, the only thing that's really causing a distraction is those ugly comms people, that are always driving you crazy with their darn, disclaimers and other things that they want us to use, which we should. As Kevin Tully said in the stream somewhere, transparency is very important.
Well, listen, guys, any other questions, any other comments? We're at the 30-minute mark.
No, I see some people at the window with signs saying, "Bring back Shelly." Too many dudes in one call.
It's testosterone fest. Well, listen, guys, thanks so much for joining the conversation. And Dan, I know you write a lot about the CMO, how to market to them, how to communicate to them, and what their challenges are. So we'll keep an eye out for some of those articles. I know your most recent one is on the front cover of themarketingscope.com. So we can check that out. Thanks.
Yeah, I would definitely let everybody know too about the CMO summits coming up this fall, right? So.
Yeah, that's right. In the fall, I think we have a handful of webinars where we're going to be talking about some of these topics. We'll have some actual real CMOs in the conversation. I know you'll be moderating a couple of those. And then we have a big event on early December. Sounds good. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Cheers all. Thanks.
That's it for this episode of Marketing Mash. You can share your thoughts by following us on Twitter and Facebook. Subscribe to our podcast to keep up with the show. And of course, you can always find us by visiting themarketingscope.com.